Hello everybody, I'm back with What Else I Saw in May Part 2. Let's pick up where we left off with number 14, a movie that I watched because I thought it was something else. I have a pretty good memory when it comes to old movies and actors and things, and usually I can keep all that information straight. But I do occasionally get it mixed up. And in this case, I confused two early 1930s Lionel Atwill horror films. I watched Dr. X thinking it was Murders in the Zoo, which I've had on my watch list for several years. Needless to say, when 10 minutes went by and there were zero references to a zoo, I realized my mistake. Released in 1932, Dr. X is a horror film in which a cannibalistic killer is murdering someone every full moon. The police suspect it's someone who works at the nearby medical research facility, which is headed by Dr. Xavier, who is played by Lionel Atwill. On the hunt for information is a reporter, played by Lee Tracy, who also takes a fancy to Dr. Xavier's daughter, played by Fay Wray. It's an early color film, very similar in look to 1933's The Mystery in the Wax Museum, which also featured Atwill and Ray, but in a different kind of relationship. Dr. X has some great photography, strong atmosphere, and spooky moments with eerie angles and shadow play, and when you consider it was directed by Michael Curtiz, well, that explains it. But there was something lacking. The story wasn't that engaging, the reveal was a little strange, Fay Wray was absolutely useless in the climactic scene, and there was way too much time given to the goofy reporter's practical jokes and unlucky mishaps. So my feelings were mixed on this one. Movie number 15 was one of a handful of World War II films I saw toward the end of the month, and my favorite of the bunch, 1951's I Was an American Spy. In this film, based on a true story, Anne Vorschach plays Claire Phillips, codename High Pockets, a woman in Manila who posed as a nightclub singer in order to spy on the Japanese and run an intelligence and smuggling network which proved instrumental to the American victory. This film features some great character development, as the protagonist starts out not making the wisest decisions, but there's a very clear turning point for her, an inciting event that gives her a goal and a newfound ferocity as she cleverly disguises herself as a friendly, flirtatious entertainer. I'm familiar with Anne Vorschach only for her pre-code work, opposite Paul Mooney in Scarface, The Shame of the Nation, and in the drama 3 on a Match, and quite frankly, I always thought she must have quit acting by the early 40s. It turns out they just weren't giving her good parts anymore. This was a good one, though, her last starring role on the big screen before her retirement, and she gives a fine, moving performance in what I considered a gripping film. Movie number 16, I'm going to do my best with the pronunciation, but I apologize in advance. It's a Polish film from 1958, Popiół I Diament, translated Ashes and Diamonds. It's the last day of World War II. The Germans have just signed their unconditional surrender, ending the uneasy social and political truce that had come about under Nazi rule. A pair of underground fighters assigned to assassinate the secretary of the overtaking communist government carry out their job, only to find that they've killed the wrong man. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe this is the first Polish film that I've ever watched. And apparently I went straight to the top, as Ashes and Diamonds is considered one of, if not the best, Polish film ever made. So, I feel very awkward saying that I had some trouble getting into it. I didn't much care for the personality of the main character, the student Maciek, though psychologically I liked his character arc. His perspective regarding his duty shifts as he realizes he's murdered two innocent people, as he falls in love, and as he keeps bumping into the man he was supposed to kill. Aesthetically, there are some great moments and powerful visuals, and I liked the core story, the external conflict that becomes an internal one. but it felt drawn out to me, and I know that's partly because I'm just not so familiar with the history here, so I couldn't follow along with some of the statements the film was making. It would have been better if I'd done some contextual research beforehand. I also found it difficult to determine which characters I was supposed to be sympathizing with, but considering the film's success with opposing sides when it came out in Poland, I guess that was kind of the point. I've since learned that Ashes and Diamonds is the conclusion of a trilogy of highly regarded World War II films directed in the late 1950s by Andrzej Wajda. The second in that trilogy, Kanal, is already on my watch list. Movie number 17 is a 2011 action thriller titled The Double. A U.S. senator is murdered, and it looks like his killer is a criminal mastermind long thought dead. Richard Gere plays the CIA agent who hunted him down before and doesn't believe he's resurfaced, who gets pulled out of retirement to help find him again. He gets paired up with a green agent who's never been in the field before, who's kind of a fanboy of the case, played by Topher Grace. The plot involves a lot of twists and deceptions and reveals, which was fun for a while, but it managed somehow to become both overcomplicated and oversimplified at the same time. At one point I thought I had it all figured out, but I was wrong, which in the moment I felt was just as well, because it's not like my idea was that good. I'm not sure, however, if the final reveal was that much better than what I'd come up with. Movie number 18 is another war movie, this one more of a drama, 1942's Reunion in France. Joan Crawford stars as a frivolous, upper-class Frenchwoman whose world is turned upside down when the Germans invade Paris. She finds her house taken over, her wealth gone, and her fiancé-turned-collaborator. Faced with these circumstances, she admirably rises to the occasion, accompanied by patriotic speeches and Franz Waxman's anthem-heavy music, especially when she bumps into a downed U.S. bomber pilot with the RAF, played, if you can believe it or not, by John Wayne, who's hiding from the Germans. A very interesting cast in this one. It was unusual enough to see Crawford doing a war film, even more so to see her co-star with John Wayne, although Philip Dorn plays her primary love interest. There's also Reginald Owen, who I didn't recognize, Ernst Deutsch from The Third Man, John Carradine as the sinister and super skinny head of the Gestapo, Howard Da Silva as a very unbelievable undercover policeman, Albert Besserman, and even Henry Daniel. It was a good film, one story with a lot of components and characters. It got a little complicated in the final act, but everything was cleared up in a satisfying way. I don't love Joan Crawford, but she gave a convincing performance, and I must mention her character's numerous gorgeous gowns were designed by Irene. Movie number 19 is Drums Along the Mohawk, a 1939 film shot in glorious Technicolor in which Claudette Colbert and Henry Fonda play a pair of newlyweds in 1776 who go out to the New York Frontier Valley to start a home, only to enter conflict with the Indians who are allied with the Tories. The picture looks great, although maybe it's a trifle too soft and pretty for a war drama with so much tragedy. The film features good performances from the leads. I always like Colbert's war films, though the American Revolution isn't quite what I mean when I say that, and Henry Fonda, of course, is always dependable. This being a John Ford film, it features a couple of his stock players, John Carradine, again, as an eye-patch-wearing Tory officer, and Ward Bond as a fellow frontiersman. The highlight of this film for me was Edna May Oliver, who was a real treat, delightfully irreverent and independent in all of her scenes. She, Arthur Shields as the Reverend, and Chief John Bigtree as Blueback did a lot to enhance the film. Movie number 20 is an action thriller from 2012 set in Manhattan, Man on the Ledge, where an escaped con, played by Sam Worthington, threatens to jump off a ledge 21 stories high. Meanwhile, a heist is in progress across the street, and I'm not going to explain how the two are related. Worthington leads a cast that includes Elizabeth Banks, Ed Harris, Jamie Bell, and Anthony Mackie. This was a tense movie, lots of twists and excitement. It was especially stressful for my poor mom, who doesn't like heights and doesn't even like to look at people standing on the edges of things. Worthington gets on that ledge very early in the movie, and I almost thought we were going to have to stop and watch something else. But she made it through, and we all agreed we enjoyed the ride. A lot of critics were snarky about this movie, but whatever, we had fun. Movie number 21 is a 1964 film written and directed by Yves Melchior, The Time Travelers, also known as Time Trap, in which a group of scientists open up a time portal and step 107 years into the future, where the last of humanity is building a rocket to escape from the nuke-destroyed planet and its hostile mutants. It's essentially The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, with the added element of space travel. This is a B-movie, one that got the MST3K treatment, but it's above average in my opinion. The humans in the future employ some androids who are memorable and a little bit scary, if you're scared by things like that, and you can tell the effects people had fun with the concept. I spent way too much time wondering if any of the skin I was seeing was real, or if it was all part of the costume. I think it was all part of the costume. I was thinking they could actually be women for all I know, so I looked it up afterward, and guess what? There are just 2 people in the cast list who are credited as androids. One of them is a man, the other is a woman. There's a shot during the whimsical How the Androids Are Made sequence in which one android lays down on an operating table and they replace his head. The effect is seamless, making me exclaim with childlike awe, how'd they do that in 1964? It's one of a few instances of clever sleight of hand we get to see in this film. The movie does have its slow moments where you're just waiting for the next thing to happen, and there are some amazingly corny lines, but it's fun and interesting, and I really liked the dark turn it took. My mom, who likes happy resolutions, felt the ending was dissatisfying, and I concede it's probably not the most original idea in the world, though maybe this movie came up with the idea first, but I thought it took the movie up another notch. I thought it was quite an entertaining film, cheesiness and all. Movie number 22 is another French-set, Hollywood-made World War II film, 1944's Uncertain Glory. Errol Flynn stars as a petty career criminal, long sought after by the police, who is facing execution for murder. Just before his head is chopped off, the prison gets bombed, allowing him to escape. The inspector soon catches up to him, but then they wind up in a village where 100 men are being held hostage by the Gestapo and will be killed unless a saboteur admits his guilt. Flynn hatches a plan to give himself up, since he was going to be killed anyway, but does he mean it, or is he plotting another escape? Flynn's criminal is charming, no surprise there, it's Errol Flynn, and often insincere. You keep expecting that inevitable patriotic change of heart, but it's a long time coming. There's a nice little romance with a sweet village girl who knows nothing of Flynn's sketchy past, and her wholesomeness makes for a good contrast with his Errol Flynn-ness. But I think the real highlight of the film is the relationship between Flynn and the inspector who sticks to him like glue, played by Paul Lucas. That was the core of it, in my opinion, and both Flynn and Lucas give fine performances. Movie number 23 is a drama from 2017 titled Gold Star. After her elderly father suffers a major stroke and she has to come home to help take care of him, a Juilliard student struggles to figure out her life. This one is tricky to talk about. On the one hand, it was written, produced, and directed by its young star, Victoria Negri, and that's very impressive. Also, there's an element of autobiography to it, and when such a heavy story about suffering and loss reflects the filmmaker's own personal experience, and that filmmaker is the star of the movie, it makes it almost impossible to criticize it. But I'd been wanting to see this movie for a couple years, I think ever since it came out, and it just was not what I'd expected. What I was looking for was a moving story about a father-daughter relationship where she reluctantly becomes a caregiver, and we see how challenging and frustrating, but also how rewarding that relationship can be. What I saw was a movie that focused on the daughter, who appears in every scene, often by herself, and unfortunately, I just didn't like the character, who came across as dull and irresponsible. Her reaction to her father seemed apathetic at times, accusatory at others. It's not that I don't feel sympathy for her situation, but her actions in the film bothered me. Plus, the script and the editing and the performance left us to fill in a lot of gaps, which I don't think is the best way to communicate what a character is feeling in such a sensitive scenario. The best I can do is project, but how I think I would react in the situation is nothing like how I see the character reacting, so I end up at kind of an impasse. Only in the last 5 minutes did things start to look up. But then the movie ended without reaching a satisfying, cathartic peak, and it felt so close, like one more line would have clinched it. The movie's main strength is Robert Vaughn's performance as her father. This was Vaughn's final role before his death, and without really speaking a word, he gives the best, most emotional performance in the film. Movie number 24 is one that I feel like I can't really count. I'll explain why. 1945's Cornered. Dick Powell plays a Canadian serviceman after the war who goes looking for the Nazi collaborators responsible for his wife's death in an attack on the French underground. He ends up traveling to South America and uncovering a whole network of Nazis and their flunkies, but the one man he wants most is the hardest to find. Here's why I feel like I can't fairly critique this one. I definitely saw the first 45 minutes and the last 25 minutes, but what was in the middle, it was kind of hit and miss because I kept nodding off. Which is not a criticism of this movie in particular by any means. If you want to know the awful truth, I probably had a long blink while watching about a third of these movies. Jerome Weaselberry's a fraud. She claims she watches all these movies, but she really just sleeps through all of them. No, I never sleep through a movie. Anything that I do fall asleep on, I won't count it. I won't talk about it. What sometimes happens is at some point I get into a cozy position on the couch and that makes me feel sleepy and I nod off for a couple seconds. If it's really bad, my mom catches me and says, "Hey, are you sleeping?" Which shames me and startles me enough that I snap back to attention, and then for the rest of the movie I'm wide awake. This isn't something I'm proud of, and it's just one more thing that makes me feel like I'm an old woman, but there it is, the truth is out. The last movie on the list this time, number 25, is a 1957 drama set during the Korean War, Sayonara, in which Marlon Brando stars as an ace pilot who finds himself conflicted when his subordinate insists on marrying a Japanese girl at a time when fraternization between soldiers stationed in Japan and the local women wasn't allowed and marriage was strongly discouraged. Brando's ideals are further challenged when he falls for a Japanese woman himself. In many ways, this was a beautiful film. It's vibrant and rich, filmed in Technicolor, with scenic vistas and snapshots of both older and newer Japanese customs, especially pertaining to the theater culture. Brando leads an impressive cast, adopting a southern drawl that was a little hard to understand at times. His character is likable for all that, especially in the humorous culture shock moments. The rest of the cast includes Miko Taka, James Garner, Patricia Owens, also Red Buttons and Miyoshi Umeki, who both won Best Supporting Performance Oscars. The only questionable casting is that of Mexican Ricardo Montalban as a kabuki theater star. His performance is remarkable, restrained, and I would say tastefully done, but it's still an odd casting choice. It doesn't go to the offensive extreme of Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, but couldn't they have found someone Japanese? The film focuses on a couple of love stories, and to a great extent it is charming, but it takes a dark, sobering turn, and that's when it became disheartening and rough to get through. It ended up being one of those films that I have a hard time determining how much I truly enjoyed watching it. As a side note, movies like this from that era always make me think about my uncle and aunt. He was in the military stationed in Japan and met a Japanese girl and they fell in love. When his time in the service was up, they got married, and they've been married and living in Japan ever since. This was in the late 60s or early 70s, I think, when the rules against interracial relationships scrutinized in this film were no longer in place. But the subject still makes me reflect on what things might have been like for them, so the film carries additional personal interest for me. And that concludes the list of what else I saw in May. It's a good thing I decided to give The Vast of Night its own review because I'm tired. I hope you enjoyed the video. A list of the movies I discussed can be found in the description. Share any thoughts you have on these films in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.